can you please explain what exactly is difficult in fixing Mark IV belts and Mark II pipes for correct speed? Isn't that so hard to fix? So if it is easy to fix, I feel like we would have fixed it at this point. That's a
good one.
But that's not always the case though, because sometimes things just kind of slip through the cracks. But for the Mark IV belts and like the inaccuracy there, that's weird. We don't know exactly why that happens, and we have investigated it, and I don't know what the result of that investigation was. I think maybe something else came up or something. I don't know. I'm gonna make a note of that because actually I want to check in on that again. Belt speed thing. But when it comes to the correct speed for pipes, however, that is due to a limitation with the numbers that we're using. We don't have enough precision with the values that we're using. We're getting like too high values that we can't like precisely store within the computer, and that's an issue with like floating point values for computing in general. So it's like we need to change like the formula or something like that if we want to make that work. Yeah, it's kind of like hard to explain it because you kind of like need to actually see the code and like actually explain it in code. But that's the gist of it essentially. The pipes is essentially floating point errors, and the Mark IV belts like being inaccurate. That's weird. Don't know what's up with that. What's broken with Mark IV belts? So there's a really strange bug and there's a really good QA post on this actually. So you actually don't need to make a QA post because we definitely know what the like Reaper cases are for it. We just haven't figured out like why it's happening fully. So there's an issue where depending on how you divide the belts, after Mark IV speed, depending on how you divide the belt, you lose throughput on the belt, and we don't know why. Because it doesn't make any sense. That's the gist of it. So like depending on how you divide the belt, you get different speeds on it. But it mostly affects people like that are building really like 100% efficient factories. So like not everyone notices it even. And I don't think it's like huge issue. Like it's not huge number changes. But it's enough to like if you want to have like a fully 100% efficient factory, like at some point of the chain, you're gonna notice like these numbers don't add up, and that might be because of that. Yeah, that's essentially that.
As a software engineer, I'm thankful every day that I work in a domain that doesn't require floating point numbers.
Yeah, so when I remember very vividly when I started doing game dev, and I was fascinated by like, wow, they're using floating points so often. Why is that? Because they're not precise. And then like you realize like how much faster it is to use them, and it makes sense on the GPU and all that shit. So like, yeah, kind of makes sense. But it's annoying because they're floating point, and floating points, it's the precision is floating.
It's floating around everywhere.
It's floating, just like, never mind. I forgot we were streaming for like a second.
Oh my god, that's dangerous.
I mean, that's happened. That's happened a couple of times when you were in Australia and I was streaming alone. There were a couple of times where I was streaming and then I forgot I was streaming and I started like doing other shit. And then I was like, wow, this like streamer I'm watching, their chat is moving really fast, and then I'm like, wait, that's my chat. Jeez. Any updates?
Refactored factory game to integer only. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, that would be. But I mean, that's the thing. Like, you could do integer only for certain parts of it, right? But then you need to handle how you do the calculations with the integers. So, like, you need to translate if you want to do any type of decimal values. Like, you need to translate it, and then it needs to make sense within that translation. And then the same thing, you can also run out of precision at some point too. So
yeah, because like, isn't there like, for example, sorry that we're not talking about the pinned message right now, but like, for example, like, I don't know if people who aren't computer scientists or programmers realize this, but like, isn't like the number 0.1? Isn't that like not actually? There's something like really simple like that. It cannot be represented in floating point. I mean, there are many numbers that won't. But
Yeah,
like,
there are many
if
numbers.
Something as simple as that, like, cannot be represented.
Yeah, I think it's also like it varies which numbers
Doesn't
can't
fit
be.
in float exactly.
Yeah.
0.1 doesn't. So
Yeah.
like, yeah, for those of you who don't know how to who don't know programming or computer science stuff, just FYI, certain numbers just like can't even be presented in a computer.
Yeah.
We just approximate them and guess. Yeah.
Or rather, their representation is approximated.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you're doing calculations that sometimes need to be precise, exact. You're doing that on approximations, and then when you do that multiple times, at some point at the end, you're gonna deviate from your expected results. And that's just kind of how it is. Like, there's not the only way to get around that is to use precise values, but then they're not as fast, and then in certain cases, you want to have fast calculations. So
exactly,
it's a tricky subject. Yeah, like doubles. Doubles are actually precise, but then they're much slower to use. And they're much bigger, I think, too. I think they're twice the size.
I'm not sure. I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember either.